Hello and welcome back to the second part of this lecture on Lorentz transformation. In the first part we had stopped at Minkowski spacetime, and we showed that the Lorentz transformation using the Minkowski spacetime coordinates, we can basically express the Lorentz transformation in terms of a matrix transformation equation which involves the Minkowski spacetime coordinates. So this is basically you're transforming from one set of coordinates to another set of coordinates, and transformation matrix is the Lorentz transformation matrix. This leads us naturally to the idea of four vectors, which is one of the structures of spacetime. So what is exactly a four vector? So a four vector is defined as any set of four quantities. You take any set of four quantities, you take a1, a2, a3 and a4 together and call it as A. Okay, so this A will be a four vector if it transforms under a Lorentz transformation. Okay, the transformation. This is the transformation matrix which governs the transformation of this set of four quantities. Then we say that it's a four vector. Okay, that is, if I have a set of four quantities, I'm measuring it in one frame, one inertial reference frame, and I'm measuring these same four quantities in another inertial reference frame. Then these two different set of measurements that we have of these four quantities, the transformation between them is the Lorentz transformation. If this is satisfied, then we say that it's a four vector. So dot product of four vectors a dot b, I have one vector a, another vector b. Dot product of them will be simply a1 b1 plus a2 b2 plus a3 b3 plus a4 b4. And the dot product of four vectors is invariant, that is a tilde dot b tilde is equal to a dot b. So you could try this out. It's very straightforward. All you have to do is we have to just expand them. Okay, so this let's say you take a tilde b tilde. Okay, you take a tilde b tilde, you expand it using this expression. Okay, the dot product of four vectors, you expand it using this. So it will be a1 tilde b1 tilde plus a2 tilde b2 tilde plus a3 tilde b3 tilde plus a4 tilde b4 tilde. Then you substitute for all these a1 tilde b1 tilde, all of these you substitute using the Lorentz transformation. You just substitute them using the transformation equation, you substitute them, and then you simplify this and you will find that you will be left with a1 b1 plus a2 b2 plus a3 b3 plus a4 b4. So that is going to be simply a dot b. So it shows that the dot product of four vectors is invariant, which is actually a very good result, because it naturally takes you to the idea that the space-time interval is also invariant. Okay, how we can see that is this. So suppose I am having two events a and b. Okay, the displacement four vector is a separation between their Minkowski space-time coordinates. So displacement between these two events will be delta x is equal to the coordinates of a minus the coordinates of b. Now if I take the self dot product of this displacement four vector, that will give us the space-time interval. Okay, you can actually work this out. So space-time interval is nothing but, so delta s square is nothing but the self dot product of this displacement four vector. And since this also you can verify it on your own. So because the space-time interval is nothing but a dot product, and because the dot product of four vectors is invariant, so this means that the space-time interval also should remain invariant across all inertial reference frames. Okay, so another concept that gives us structure to space-time is that of space-time diagram. I had shown you a space-time diagram some time back. Okay, so we have, it's basically a graph of position, spatial position versus time. We can, at the most we can go two spatial dimensions and one time dimension, because that's how we can, that's the maximum that we can represent, because three spatial dimensions and one time dimension we cannot represent it in the form of a single graph. So in this example that I have shown, we have just taken a one dimension, that is x dimension, and the vertical axis is the time dimension. So you would have probably come across these graphs, right? This is position versus time. In your high school, you would have, when you studied motion, right, you would have come across this position time graphs, right? That is one of the first things that you were probably taught in your mechanics in physics. Position times graph, that is x versus t, and you know that from you can find out from that graph you can find out what is the velocity and so on, right? So here what happens is we turn it around. Okay, instead of position along the y-axis and position along the vertical and time along the horizontal, is the other way around. We have time along the vertical and position along the x horizontal. Okay, So here these are two different lines that I have drawn, this plus 45 degrees and minus 45 degrees. These give us the important boundaries. Okay, so all the points which lie, so suppose I have a object which is over here, all the points which lie in this region, okay, they are the future of this point, and all the points which lie here, they are the past of this point. And a world line, what is a world line? World line is basically a trajectory of a particle in space-time. Okay, a particle is basically, as it propagates through space-time, it will its trajectory is called as a world line. Okay, so now what is the speed along what is going to be the speed along this dotted line? The speed along this dotted line will be the speed of light, because you see how do you find out speed? Speed is displacement by time, right? So here along the horizontal we have x, along the vertical we have ct. It's not just t, it is ct. So the slope of this line, if it's at 45 degrees, okay, x and t values, if they're equal, the slope of this, okay, when it's at 45 degrees, the slope of this will be 1. That means this is 45 degrees. So this is how, suppose I'm having source of light here, and it starts emitting light. Light is going to move along this dotted line here, and light is going to move along this dotted line in this direction. If the light is, if you're shining light along the negative x-axis, light is going to travel along this world line. This is the world line of light, and this is the world line of light. Since nothing can travel faster than the speed of light, so therefore everything, all objects will be confined within this region. Because if you say that you're moving along this side, okay, that means the speed, if you're saying that a particle is moving along this, that then the speed of the particle should be greater than the speed of light, which of course violates the second postulate of relativity. So all the particles, all the objects that we have, they should always lie in this case. So these region, okay, this region that we have here, why we call it as a future? Because we call it as a future because these are the points, all the points here, this is what are accessible to this particular point. So if this point from here, if you want to go anywhere, it's only these points that are accessible to you. Okay, so as you progress through this, only the points which lie within this region, they are the ones where you can go. You cannot go outside this. So it's like you're holding a torch. Okay, you're having a torch, and this is like a beam of the torch. Only difference is, I mean, only those points where the light falls, only those points are accessible to you. All the other places, they are dark. Okay, so you cannot go here and you cannot go here. So as you move forward, you're actually carrying a torch with you and moving forward. And of course, the only difference is, in real life we can move the torch around wherever we want, but here the torch will be always in the upward direction. So I'll show it to you in the form of a animation here. So this is what we have here. So I have a particle, so as it moves forward, so this is again the same, the region, okay, this region which is accessible to it. So as it moves forward, the green part is what is accessible to the particles. Only those points it can actually move. Okay, so this space-time diagrams, the world line, it's extremely useful because the slope, first of all, the slope of the world line, it gives the velocity of the particle. How? Velocity is directly proportional to the slope. Okay, so I think it's the other way around. I think I made it, okay, small correction here. Velocity is inversely proportional to the slope. It's not directly proportional. I'll make the correction. Velocity is inversely proportional to the slope of the world line in a space-time diagram. So let's consider this. So we have this as the x and this as the time axis. So I'm initially having the particle is here, and finally the particle is over here. So the displacement is delta x, and along this direction the displacement is c delta t. So what is slope? Slope is always vertical divided by horizontal, where is c delta t divided by x. Okay, so delta t by delta x. Delta x by delta t is v. So the slope is nothing but c by v. Of course, this is nothing but 1 by beta. So it means v, velocity, is equal to c by slope. Okay, so velocity is inversely proportional to slope. It's not directly proportional, it is inversely proportional to the slope. So v is equal to c by slope. So because velocity of any particle, it is always less than the speed of light. Okay, and nothing can travel faster than the speed of light, second postulate of relativity. So because v is always less than equal to the speed of light, so therefore we can work out from here the slope should always be greater than or equal to 1. Okay, so it should always, for any particle, it should always have a slope which is greater than 1. no slopes less than 1 is actually allowed. So for light, the slope will be obviously equal to 1, right? Because for light, v is equal to c, so c by c, this will give us slope to be equal to 1. So for light, the slope is going to be equal to 1. That means that is going to be 45 degrees, as I had shown in this diagram. Okay, so 45 degrees, this is for light, this is the world line for light. Next, the slope also gives us the type of space-time interval. Okay, slope also gives us this type of space-time interval. So if the slope is greater than 1, if the slope is greater than 1, then you can travel from that along that space-time interval, and we call it as a time-like space-time interval. If the slope is equal to 1, we call it as a light-like space-time interval. So that is obvious because the slope is equal to 1 for light. And if the slope is less than 1, that is known as a space-like interval. Okay, so if the slope is 1, so if let's say we consider one point here and the next point over here, okay, the slope in this case will be 0, which is less than 1. So this is a space-like interval. So here we need to keep in mind is only those intervals which are time-like, only for them there is going to be a causal connection. Okay, let me go back to this slide. Only for those intervals which are time-like, only for them there is going to be a causal connection. That is, one event causes the other event. So I have one event here and another event over here. We can say that this event is caused by this event because the space-time interval between them is, we can say that this event, second event, could be caused by the first event because there is a time-like space-time interval between the two. But if we have one event here and another event over here, then this is a space-like interval, then there cannot be any causal relationship between this. We cannot say that this event is caused by this, or this is caused by, or this is caused by the other event. Why? Because if this event has to cause this event, then it has to send a signal, okay, and that signal will have a slope which is less than 1. If it has a slope or less than 1, that means it's traveling faster than the speed of light, which is impossible. So you cannot have any causal connection between these two. So that's why we say that this entire region is the future of this, because this is what is accessible. It can manipulate, or it can access what all the events that are taking place within this region. So a very illuminating discussion on this is actually given in Griffith. So I strongly suggest that you go through this to get a better understanding of this nature of causality. Okay, so next important concept in the structure of space-time is called as proper time. So proper time is basically the time associated with a moving object under observation. So suppose I have an object which is moving, okay, and this object, there is a, let's say there is a clock this object is carrying. So the time which will be shown in that clock, that is basically your proper time. Okay, so a stationary, so let's say a stationary observer measures a time interval dt, then a moving observer measures a time d tau, then this d tau is the proper time. So d tau, proper time, is related to the observed time. Okay, observed time is dt, proper time is d tau. So proper time is related to the observed time in this, using this expression. So now as proper time, it remains invariant across all inertial reference frames. Okay, so I have a moving object, and this moving object, let's say there is carrying a clock, or let's say I have a clock which is moving. The time that is being kept by that clock, that will remain invariant across all inertial reference frames. Okay, now this may sound strange, but let's see how this works. Let's take an example. Example is, let's say I'm having 3 observers. One observer is in the first spaceship. The spaceship is moving with a speed of 50% of the speed of light, towards from left to right. Then another observer who is on the ground, and I have a third observer who is moving with a speed with a velocity of 20% of the speed of light, also in the same direction as the first observer. Okay, so now let's say you are in the first spaceship, okay, and you have your 2 friends. One friend is on the ground, another friend is on another spaceship, and both of them, they are observing you. Let's say you are an astronaut, you are tired, and you want to take a nap, and so you took a nap for 1 hour. Okay, so you take out your stopwatch, and then you start the stopwatch, and not stopwatch. Let's say you take out your alarm clock. You start your alarm, and you set an alarm after 1 hour. So it means you'll basically take a nap for 1 hour. So the time that you will be measuring is going to be 1 hour. okay, but the time that will be measured by your friend on the ground and your friend on this spaceship will not be 1 hour. It will be more than 1 hour. Why? Because of time dilation. So the time which is observed by you will be 1 hour, but the time which is observed by your friend on the ground, which will be, it will be 1 hour and 9 minutes. The time that is observed by your friend in the other spaceship, it will be 1 hour 4 minutes. Okay, so how exactly I am getting these values, 1 hour 9 minutes and 1 hour 4 minutes? I have left this to you as an exercise, so you can just work this out on your own. You just have to use the velocity addition and time dilation formulas. Okay, you can use that and you can find out that this is indeed the case. Okay, so now later on, let's say they all three friends, you all are sitting, okay, in a cafe, and then you are comparing your results. Okay, you say that, okay, I have taken a nap for 1 hour, but your friend on the observer said, but he will say, the second observer on the ground will say that, no, but I saw you taking a nap for 1 hour 9 minutes, and this friend will say that, no, I saw you taking a nap for 4 minutes. These two friends, they will not disagree with you, okay, because all of you know special theory of relativity. So all of them, they will know that the time that you will see is going to be 1 hour, and they are getting more than 1 hour is because of time dilation. That all three of you actually know. They will be basically disagreeing with each other. They will not agree with each other. So because this observer will not be, observer number 2 will not be able to obtain the time that this has got, and this observer will not be able to obtain the time this has got. They know their own equations, and using they know what they can measure is the relative velocity between you and them. Okay, so he will be able to measure the relative velocity between you and him. He will be able to measure the relative velocity between both of you, and using this relative velocity, they have come up with these values. Okay, so they will disagree with the results that both of them had got, but they will not disagree with the time duration that you have told. The reason is because you can always calculate back, and you can find out what is the time that is being shown by the moving observer. So both of them will agree that the time that is being shown by your clock, that is going to be 1 hour. So this is what we are talking about. This is the proper time. Okay, the time that is associated with a moving object which is under the observation. Then this brings us to 4 velocity. 4 velocity is a 4 vector, which means 4 velocity, it transforms under Lorentz transformation. So what is ordinary velocity? Ordinary velocity as measured by a stationary observer is rate of change of position, right? So we call it as u. We don't call it as v, because I'm reserving v for the relative velocity between reference frames. V is the relative velocity between reference frame, and u is the velocity of a particle. Okay, so we all already know the velocity, the 3-dimensional velocity which is measured by a stationary observer is the rate of change of position. 4 velocity or proper velocity is defined in this way. It is like a hybrid. Okay, it is like a hybrid. What it does is, it will measure the change in the coordinates. It will measure the change in the Minkowski space-time coordinates. Okay, position coordinates, and that change in the position, it will take the ratio of that with respect to the proper time. So here, this is what is measured by the stationary observer, and this time is what is measured by the moving observer, the moving object which is under observation. So this, in the numerator, it is what is measured by a particular observer, and this is what is the time that is carried by the moving object. So it's displacement, observed displacement divided by the proper time. That is basically a proper velocity. So because this d tau, as we have seen, proper velocity, it is related to the proper time is related to the observed time. So we can now use the chain rule. So dxi by d tau is equal to dxi by dt into dt by d tau. So this dt by d tau will give us a factor of 1 by under root 1 minus u square by c square. And what is dxi by dt? This is what is observed, and this is also what is observed. So this is the observed velocity. Okay, so this is the observed velocity. So this is the rate at which your coordinates are changing with respect to observed time. So vi is simply xi dot divided by under root 1 minus u square by c square. So these are the coordinates of the proper velocity or 4 velocity. So we can break this down into components. So component wise, this is what will happen. So you just put 1 here. So v1 is equal to x1 dot by under root 1 minus u square by c square. What is x1 dot? X1 dot is x1 is nothing but x coordinate. So x1 dot will be nothing but dx by dt. And what is dx by dt? Dx by dt is the x component of the observed velocity. Then what is v2? Same thing, you put a 2 here, okay, you put a 2 here, so x2 dot divided by under root 1 minus u square by c square. So x2 dot is nothing but dy by dt, which is equal to uy. Same thing here also, this will be uz by this. And finally, what is v4? V4 is nothing but x4 dot divided by under root 1 minus u square by c square. What is x4? x4 is ICT, right? So x4 dot is nothing but d by dt of ICT. And what is d by dt of ICT? I and c are constant, so it is dt by dt, that will be 1. So it will be IC divided by under root 1 minus u square by c square. So hence the 4 velocity can be written like this. Hence the 4 velocity is v1, v2. It's a combination of v1, v2, v3 and v4. So v1, v2, v3 and v4. These are the 4 components. We take this under root 1 minus u square by c square. We take it common. So what is here in the numerator? Ux, uy, uz, ic. So ux, ui, uz will be the first 3 components and ic will be the 4th component. This ux, ui, uz combination of these 3 is nothing but your classical 3-dimensional velocity which is observed. So velocity u comma ic divided by under root 1 minus u square by c square. Okay, so when I write this, what I basically mean is, this is a 4 velocity, it should have 4 components, but I'm writing it as 2 components because this first component that we have, it's actually made up of 3 components. So 3 components for this and 1 more component here. So that's why we write it like this. So this is your 4 velocity. So 4 velocity is this. So this 4 velocity is a 4 vector and hence it transforms via the Lorentz transformation. That is, okay, this is vi tilde, okay, read this as vi tilde. So vi tilde in another frame, if you want to measure the 4 velocity, that will be simply the Lorentz transformation matrix times the vector in the given reference frame. So the components, okay, its components are simply, the tilde components will be simply, you just expand this using the Lorentz transformation. That's how easy it is. Okay, so this will directly give us the transformation. Now compare that with something that you had probably done in your undergraduate, velocity transformation equations from one frame to another frame. Look how complicated these are and how elegant and simple and elegant this is. So this is an advantage of using 4 velocity instead of ordinary velocity. Again, in 4 velocity, we have the way we have defined it is, in the numerator we have the change in the coordinates, observed coordinates, and the denominator we have the proper time interval, right? This is another advantage because if we used the dxi by dt, okay, let me go back to the definition. If we go back to this one, okay, we had defined this as dxi by d tau. Why not dxi by dt? The problem is, if I use dxi by dt, the numerator is also not invariant and the denominator is also not invariant, because dxi by dt, if I put a dt here, space, okay, observed space and observed time, both of them are not invariant with respect to inertial reference frames. Okay, so as a result, we'll obtain an extremely complicated expression if we do that, and it will not undergo a Lorentz transformation. It will not transform as Lorentz transformation. Okay. But the moment we put a proper time here, the proper time is going to be, anyway, it's going to be invariant, right, with respect to transformation from one IRF to another inertial reference frame. So the only place where the transformation works is going to be only in the numerator. So that's the advantage of using 4 velocity instead of using maybe ordinary 3-dimensional velocity. Then we have 4 momentum. 4 momentum capital P is defined similar to ordinary 3-dimensional momentum. So P is equal to m into v. So v is the 4 velocity and m is the rest mass. So this 4 momentum can be expanded using v, okay, in this way. P is equal to, I think you read this as ordinary momentum, small p, okay. So the 4 momentum is equal to this v, we have already seen, it is equal to u comma ic divided by under root 1 minus u square by c square. So relativistic momentum, okay, the relativistic momentum P is equal to mu by under root 1 minus u square by c square. This actually, I'm just picked up this result from your special theory of relativity undergraduate course. And the relativistic energy is E is equal to mc square divided by under root 1 minus u square by c square. So relativistic momentum is this and relativistic energy is this. So basically it gives you a clue That is, I can take one c here, so E by c will give us mc divided by under root 1 minus u square by c square, and you can put these in over here, okay, because mu, the first component, mu divided, the first three components, mu divided by under root 1 minus u square by c square, mu under root 1 minus divided by under root 1 minus u square by c square, that is nothing but p. So p will replace this p here, and the second one, which is mc, okay, there is a I here, mc divided by under root 1 minus u square by c square is nothing but E by c. So first three components is nothing but your three-dimensional relativistic momentum, and the last component is nothing but your relativistic energy. So we can write down the 4 momentum or energy. It is also known as the energy momentum 4 vector. Okay, so P can be expanded using small p here, not capital V. It can be expanded using small p in this way. So of course this brings us to, I'll just state what is known as the conservation of relativistic energy momentum. In any, it can be shown that in any closed system, the total relativistic energy and momentum, they are always conserved. Now when we say conservation, I'll have to make a clarification here. We have used two words here, invariant and conserved, right? Invariant quantities and conserved quantities. What's the difference between them? They are not the same. Okay, what is an invariant quantity? Any physical quantity that has the same value in all inertial reference frame. Okay, that's the only thing. It has got one value in one inertial reference frame, another inertial reference frame, it has the same value, then that we say it's an invariant quantity. But conserved quantity is any physical quantity when you make it undergo a process, before and after the process, the value of that physical quantity remains the same. So that's, then we call it as a conserved quantity. So invariant quantity and conserved quantity. So any physical quantity, it could be invariant and not conserved, it could be conserved and not invariant. Okay, all these combinations, all these 4 combinations are possible. So I've made a table which will actually help you to quickly remember. Okay, so what are the quantities? So for instance, mass. Okay, mass is invariant. Okay, mass is invariant, but it is not conserved because mass can change. Energy and mass are interchangeable. So mass, whether you measure it in one inertial frame or another inertial frame, the mass is always going to be invariant. It's going to remain the same. But the mass before a process or after a process need not remain the same. So mass is not conserved. Energy is always conserved. Okay, energy is always conserved. But energy, the value of energy that you measure, it will change from inertial reference frame to inertial reference frame. So energy is not invariant, but it is always conserved. Charge is, electric charge is one quantity which is invariant as well as conserved. Okay, so the electric charge, whether you measure it in one frame or another frame, it will always remain the same. So it is invariant. And if you make the charge undergo some kind of a process wherein you don't add or subtract any charge from outside, then the charge is also going to remain conserved. So charge is a quantity which is both invariant as well as conserved. And a quantity which is on the other side of the spectrum, which is neither invariant nor conserved, is velocity. Okay. Next, this brings us to force. So from Newton's second law, we have the definition of the classical 3D force. The classical 3D force is basically the rate of change of momentum. I'm going to use small f to represent classical 3D force because capital F I'm using for the force. Okay, but the classical force, it does not transform by Lorentz transformation in space-time. It can be easily shown. So we define something called as a force in the same way as the classical force. So force is nothing but the rate of change of the 4 momentum. As simple as that. Okay, the rate of change of the 4 momentum, of course, with respect to the proper time. So dp by d tau, that is where we define the force. So force can also be expressed in terms, just like how had the 4 momentum was expressed in terms of the relativistic momentum vector. In the same way, force can also be expressed in terms of the force vector. So F is equal to dp by dt. So we take dp by d tau. So d by d tau of P is nothing but P, comma I relativistic mass into C. So okay, this is the relative, because there was a under root, right, 1 minus v square by c square. Okay, so that we call it as a relativistic mass. So P is this P, we write it like this. Now we just have to differentiate this, right? We just take this d by d tau, we have to differentiate, but then we can use the chain rule here, because d by d tau is d by dt into dt by d tau. So this d by dt will act on this as well as this, and dt by d tau of course will give us a factor of under root 1 by under root 1 minus u square by c square. So dp by dt dp by dt will give us the classical three-dimensional force, and d by dt, when it acts on this, I and c are constant, so it will give us the rate at which the relativistic mass is changing. Okay, so this is how we can express the force in terms of the classical three-dimensional force. So these are the problems that I had left to you as an assignment, as I had mentioned there. First one, of course, you have to show that the dot product of four vectors is invariant. I had already given you hints in my previous lecture. Then the second one is you have to verify the time intervals that I had mentioned. It will be just good recap for you to how to use velocity addition and time dilation. Last thing that you have to show is you have to show that the four velocity and four force, they are orthogonal. Okay, I'll give you a hint here, very easy. When do you say that two quantities are orthogonal? If their dot products are 0. So you have to basically show that the dot product of V and F is 0. So how do you start? You can just take a self dot product of V with itself, and then you differentiate it. So that will give us a we have to use the product rule. So once you use the product rule, you will get a dot product of V and F, which of course will give us a 0. Okay, so very interesting problem. Please try this out. Now, before we end, I would like to just show you something that I had mentioned in the class at the beginning of the semester. That is how relativity is like the bridge between electric and magnetic fields. So actually speaking, there is no such thing as magnetic field. Okay, or we just need to talk in terms of an electromagnetic interaction between charged particles. Okay, there's only electric field. There's nothing like a magnetic field. Magnetic field is basically just a consequence of relativity. So to understand this, let's take this example. So let's say I'm having two wires. Okay, so you already know, right, what happens when current passes through two wires. Okay, so we'll take that example. So we have one wire, wire number 1, and another wire, wire number 2. So here the pink dots represents positive charge, and the white dots, it represents a negative charge. Initially no current is flowing, so the charges, they are not moving. Okay, if I take any part of the conductor, because the overall it's a conductor, it must be electrically neutral. So if I count the number of charges, the positive and negative charges, I'll find that in any part of the conductor, the total number of positive charges and the total number of negative charges, they will be just the same in both the conductors. That's what will happen. And since the total charge, net charge here is 0, because positive and negative charges, they are same. Net charge of this is 0, net charge of this is 0, and they will not attract each other. So we find that two wires, okay, which don't carry any current, they do not exert any force on each other. But the moment we apply some current, okay, let's say I have some current which is flowing from left to right. Okay, I have some current which is flowing from left to right. If current is flowing from left to right, that means positive charges will move from left to right and negative charges will move from right to left. Same thing will happen in the second conductor also. In that case, what will happen? The observation is, when you apply a current, okay, when you apply a current on two current carrying conductors, then there is going to be a force of attraction. If the current is in the same direction, these two wires will attract each other, otherwise they will repel each other. So this is the force acting on them. Now what do we attribute this force to? We simply say that this current carrying conductor, because it's a current, it creates a magnetic field here. Okay, and this magnetic and the charges here are moving. Those moving charges in a magnetic field, they experience a force which attracts them towards this side. Same thing, we can same analysis we can apply on this, and we can say the other way around as well. There is a magnetic field created by this, and this magnetic field acting on the moving charges causes a force of attraction in this direction. Okay, so that's how we explain it. Now let's apply relativity in this case. Okay, so what is the physical observation? The physical observation is, I'm having two currents. Okay, let's say for right now, for simplicity, the two currents, the amount are same. Okay, this is 5 amperes, this is also 5 amperes. The same number of amperes are passing through both of these wires. Okay, so when there is no current, then there is no attraction. The moment there is current, there is going to be some attractive force between them. So that's the physical reality. Now let's this is how we are observing. That means we as a stationary observer, or from the laboratory frame, this is what we will observe. Now let's let's go to our frame of reference. Let's say that frame of reference is moving with the charges. Okay, let's go to that frame. So we will take a frame of reference which is moving with the negative charges on the upper conductor, that is this conductor. You are moving along with these negative charges. That means you are moving from right to left. Okay, you are moving from right to left. You note both of these conductors, current is in the same direction. So here also the charges are moving from right to left. Here also the negative charges are moving from right to left. So from the point of view of this negative charge, the negative charges in the other conductor, they are going to be stationary, because this negative charge is moving from right to left. These negative charges are also moving from right to left with the same velocity, because the currents are same. So from the point of view of this negative charge, all the negative charges in the other conductor, they are going to be stationary. But what about the positive charges? The positive charges, they will move in the other direction. They will move in the other direction using with twice v. V is very small, so you can just use velocity addition in the classical case, and you can show that because I'm having two types of objects, this negative charge moving with v here, positive charge moving with v on the other opposite direction. So with respect to this negative charge, these positive charges will move with a velocity of twice v. So that's what you will observe here. It will move with a velocity of twice v. But what about the spacing? What about the gaps between these positive charges? This negative charge, what it will find is, okay, for this negative charge, the negative charges in the other conductor, they are stationary, but the positive charges, they are moving at a velocity twice v. And compared to the stationary case, when there is no charges which are flowing, you can see here, this is the stationary case, this is the gap, this is the spacing between the positive and the negative charges. For this negative charge, it finds that the gap between the positive charges, the gap, it reduces actually. Okay, this is what will be observed with this negative charge. Why does this gap reduce? Because of length contraction. Okay, when you apply relativity, because of length contraction, the gap, the spacing between the positive charges, it reduces. In the static case, when there was no current, we had same number of positive charges, same number of negative charges. So if I take a negative charge here, it finds that in the other conductor we have same number of positive and negative charges, so it will not feel any attraction or repulsion. But now when you make a current flow through this, it finds, because the gap between, the spacing between the positive charges appears to become smaller, so within the same volume it finds that the number of positive charges has increased slightly. Okay, why I say slight is because this v is actually very small, but nevertheless it's a slight increase in the net positive charge in the other wire. So this negative wire, it finds that this other wire, it is having more number of positive charges per unit volume compared to negative charges. So overall it will experience a attractive force towards this wire. Same thing, if instead of negative charge, if you take positive charges, if I move along with positive charges, that is I move from right to left, then it will find that in the other conductor, the positive charges, they are stationary, but the negative charges are moving in the opposite direction with velocity twice v. When they were stationary, the positive and negative charges, they had the same spacing between them, so as a result electrically it was neutral. But because it's moving with twice v, and due to length contraction, the spacing between the negative charges seems to reduce, and as a result this positive charge, it looks like as if there are more number of negative charges than positive charges, and hence this will also experience a net attractive force on the other conductor. Okay, so in a similar way, with a similar kind of a thinking, we can also, if you reverse the direction of current, we can show that it will be a repulsive force. So in the lab frame, okay, that is in this frame, in the lab frame, we really are not able to, I'm seeing what is the total, what is the net charge here, and I'm seeing what is the net charge here. For me, the net charge here and the net charge here is 0 in both the cases. Okay, so for me, in both cases net charge is 0, but still I'm seeing some kind of a force here. So in the lab frame, it is very easy for me to say that, okay, to make a conjecture that maybe there is some new kind of a force which is called as a magnetic force, and this magnetic force is causing this attraction. But when you go into the reference frame of the charges, you find that there is no such thing as magnetic force, it's only the electric force. Okay, so in the lab frame, it is very convenient to think of electric forces to be different from the magnetic forces, but relativity, it shows that both these forces, electric and magnetic forces, they are the result of the same electromagnetic interaction between charged particles. This is just one example, okay, how relativity can be used to explain the magnetic force. Many other cases are many other phenomena that can also be explained using relativity. So relativity is the bridge. This is why we are considering relativity into our study of electrodynamics. Even though we are doing classical electrodynamics, we need to take into account relativity, because this is the bridge between the electric and the magnetic forces. So with this, of course, now this leads us to another question. Okay, when you think about this example, okay, when you think about this example, it leads us to another question here. The question is, like I said, electric charge is a quantity which is both invariant as well as conserved, right? But the electric charge does not seem to be conserved, does not seem to be invariant, does it? Because you see here the charge, I'm having net charge to be 0 here, net charge to be 0 here. Okay, when there is no current. Here also, when you put a current, net charge is 0 here and net charge is 0 here. But when I go from, this is the lab frame, this is the inertial frame. But when from lab frame, when I go to the charge frame, this is also inertial frame, I find there are more positive charges than negative charges. Does this mean that electric charge is not invariant? The answer is no. Electric charge is still going to be invariant. We will find the answer to this question in the next part of the lecture, in which we will actually introduce to you the relativistic electrodynamics. We will use the idea of 4 vectors. We will introduce concept called as a 4 current and so on. And using all this, we'll actually first show that electric charge is actually invariant. Okay, from one inertial frame to another inertial frame, and eventually we will be able to write down the Maxwell's equations in a much more elegant and concise form. So please do the problems which I had left to you as the assignment, and in case of any queries, please feel free to get in touch with me. So with this, we come to the end of this lecture. Thank you.